Google wants to put AI compute in space. OpenAI is asking whether your model should be smarter or warmer. And Fei-Fei Li just launched a world modeling platform that lets anyone spin up explorable 3D universes from text. Plus, 11 Labs is now letting brands legally borrow the voices of legends like Michael Caine and Maya Angelou. And Baidu is out with a new model that begs the question, are we entering a race to the bottom on cost-efficient AI? And of course, Microsoft is back with a bold new vision they're calling humanist superintelligence, a future where AI gets more powerful and more human-centered at the same time. All that and more coming up in this episode of What the AI, the podcast that gives you all the AI news you need to know in 30 minutes or less. All right, Annie, I got to ask you this question. Did you grow up a Trekkie? I know this is off topic, but I promise we're going to get in. Did you grow up as a Trekkie?
I didn't grow up as a Trekkie. I feel like you've asked me this before, and every time I let you down when I
No,
tell
I
you,
just I
no.
was like raised in part by Captain Picard and Data and the crew of the USS Enterprise, Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it came to my mind today, along with our first story. I promise, audience, we'll get you there because they released the first ever Star Trek: The Next Generation Lego of the USS Enterprise. So already my Christmas list for my family is full up with just I need the Lego USS Enterprise. It's like a have to have for me, not for my kids, for me, because it's just too cool.
Legos are like really making a comeback. I feel like Legos are on everyone's Christmas list. I was surprised that like my 18-year-old son and nephew, it's made a resurgence. It's on their Christmas list. Apparently it's on, I won't give up your age, but it's on middle-aged men Christmas list.
I appreciate that.
It's like something for all ages, but that's what the box says, 0 to 99.
I will say when my kids, we were at Legoland once and they all got Legos and I passed the Saturn V rocket Lego and I was like, I have to have it. So I bought, that's still sits here in my office. You can't see it's behind the camera, but the Saturn V Legos there. And I feel like the USS Enterprise will be in that category for me. So to connect it to the AI world, here's my question for you. Related a little bit to Star Trek, could the next frontier of AI infrastructure be orbiting Earth rather than sitting in a data center here on the ground?
Could it? Tell us about it.
Maybe. So Google Research today published a blog post detailing a moonshot initiative called Project Suncatcher, a proposal to build a space-based scalable AI compute infrastructure. The concept: use solar-powered satellite constellations equipped with AI accelerator chips, their tensor processing units, and leverage the continuous sunlight in certain orbits to and avoid terrestrial constraints on energy, land, cooling, all the tough stuff. I mean, it's cold in space. There's sunlight without any obstructions. There's, lots of space. And do this to scale up large machine learning workloads. Sunlight in orbit can yield up to 8 times more energy than on Earth and is continuous. There's no night if you're in the right part of space. So we'll see. But that sounds like an interesting way to power the next generation of data centers.
I loved that they called it a moonshot, no pun intended, but also this like it actually when you think about it, I'm sure that it sounds very challenging and obviously there's a lot of logistics that are going to be really hard, but it seems so intuitive that it solves a lot of the problems that we've talked about energy use and there's not enough space and there's not enough energy and it's using too much land and too much cooling power and all this type of stuff and all of that is solved in space, which is just sort of mind-boggling. So the future is now.
The future is now. It's well, not quite now. Maybe coming soon, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on in space. And I've got a group here at Caltech figuring out how you beam solar energy from space-based solar panels down to Earth because it's more efficient. And now apparently we'll just, as opposed to doing that, we're just going to shove some data centers up in orbit and see if that works better. So I love this as a very future center, but connected. And I feel like it connects to the vision of the Star Trek universe. So we'll leave it at that.
There you go. I like that. The future is coming soon. And speaking of the future, I have a question for you. Do you want your future AIs to be really smart or do you want them to have high EQ and be really warm and fuzzy? OpenAI is actually trying to tackle this question, rolling out 2 versions of ChatGPT. One is GPT 5.1 Instant and GPT 5.1 Thinking. So Instant is faster, warmer, more conversational. It follows instructions better, feels closer to like a natural dialogue, maybe an unnaturally warm dialogue. I don't have a lot of people in my life that I speak to exactly this way. And then Thinking is the higher end sort of reasoning model. It's smart enough now to adjust how long it thinks based on the complexity of your request. So it's not going to overthink for a small request, but quick tasks get faster sort of responses, harder tasks get deeper, more thoughtful responses. So it's pretty interesting. This is a real shift for business users in sort of the tone control of what they really want their ChatGPT to sound like. You can choose how the model responds. Do you want professional, candid, concise, quirky? And then you keep that style throughout a conversation. Unfortunately, it's like a user level setting. So you can't have some conversations that are warm and some conversations that are tough. You sort of have to pick your strategy with your AI. But sort of an interesting thing to think about how different people want to interact in different styles.
It was interesting. I've been playing with 5.1. They've got some examples on the blog post of the differences and the way it will respond with more conversational or warmer tone. They say it is smarter, so I don't know that OpenAI has described it as a choice, like, do you want the smarter version or the nicer version? But it is really interesting that, while there's all these benchmarks about intelligence that people are pursuing, that they're also looking at how nice is it to interact with, what kind of style being a real differentiator, not just the quote unquote intelligence or math level capability or coding ability of these models, but how well do they communicate in different styles? And I think there are like 8 different modes you can turn on. I am still really depressed that I can't do it by conversation. Like sometimes I want a really tough critic and sometimes I want like a supportive friend. And, it depends on what I'm doing. And it's still like, I guess you could switch between conversations, but it's like, you don't tell it in each conversation which mode you want. You tell it at the user level. So
It's sort of funny to think about. Maybe this is some sort of mirror to myself, but whenever I interact with ChatGPT, I already feel like it's way too nice. I'm like, why are you always complimenting me? And that's a great question. I'm like, it really wasn't that great of a question. It was just something I was wondering about, but like, it's already to me a little bit too flattering. So I'm wondering who is interacting with it and going, it doesn't really flatter me enough, and I need it to be a little nicer. So it's sort of an interesting thing to think about. I guess it really depends on your use case. And if your OpenAI also published this week sort of a study about how people are using it, and a lot of people are really using it for emotional support, friendship connections, and that type of stuff. And I guess it's all else equal nicer to have a nice friend than a more direct friend. But I don't know, sometimes the direct friends are needed too.
yeah, I've got it set into like, I forget the name, but my mode is definitely like be blunt, be precise. And then I remember I had to put in a custom instruction too, because it would tell me, I know you like it without all the fluff. So here you go, cutting to the chase. I'm like, don't tell me you're cutting to the chase. That ruins the whole point. Just like tell me the thing I asked. So I had to tell it, like, please don't tell me you're cutting out the fluff. Just like answer my questions, blunt feedback, direct perspectives. That's all I want. Give it to me straight. And so that seems to be working, but I did have to like correct it from being too, let me give you what you want. I wanted you
Don't
to not say
don't
that is what I
tell me
wanted.
that. Yes, exactly. Well, the other thing about the thinking one that I'm very excited about is it will actually just give the answer instead of the answer with 5 new questions, which is something that I find to be frustrating about it right now, where you'll say, "Do this thing. Here's this thing. Do you also want X, Y, and Z?" Right? And so just constantly prompting more questions. And I find myself a lot of times having my prompt be, "Do this thing and please don't ask me any more questions about it." Because I'm like, I just want this one thing.
It is kinda like the infinite scroll of, ChatGPT that it's always like, and I will say probably a third of the time, it's really useful. We're going, "That is actually exactly what I would like." And a third of the time, I'm like, "No, no, no, I don't want any of that." Or two-thirds, just like, "Just let me figure out what I wanna do next. Just answer my question." So, but I think all these things point to some of the value being created by these companies in how they not just the intelligence, quote unquote, of the model on some generic benchmark of factual knowledge or problem solving capability, but how they actually feel when you're interacting with them in different contexts. And that's like, it's a very different axis. That's very hard to measure and compare upon. But I do think it's going to be a pretty important one in terms of what models we like and how we choose to use them.
That's right. Well, the rollout started November 12th for paid users. API access coming shortly, so all of our listeners should go check it out and see what tone they like.
See what tone you like. Well, if you like the tone here at What the AI and you're getting value out of this podcast, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who should be leveling up their own AI game. Doing these things helps more than you think to grow the audience and help people find the show. So, next story this week, AI can talk, but can it see, move, and imagine space like we do? And does it need to?
I feel like it doesn't. That's why we have all these robot problems. And does it need to? That's an interesting question.
So, Dr. Fei-Fei Li, one of the AI's founding figures, says that the next big leap won't come from better language, but from what she terms spatial intelligence. Today's models are articulate but disembodied. They can explain gravity, but they can't simulate what happens if you drop a ball. So, Li argues that spatial reasoning, understanding and interacting with 3D physics-based environments, is the cognitive foundation of human intelligence. But to reach it, AI needs world models, systems that don't just describe reality, but simulate reality. These models have to generate consistent 3D worlds, interpret multimodal inputs like images and actions, and predict how those worlds evolve over time. It's not just Lee who believes this. Reportedly, Meta's chief AI scientist, Jan LeCun, is preparing to leave to launch his own startup focused on world models as well. So there's a couple of votes for the world models are really critical to the future. But Fei-Fei Li's company, World Labs, just dropped a pretty major release, Marble, a new platform that turns simple text or video prompts into coherent, explorable 3D worlds. Lee sees this unlocking huge potential, immersive storytelling, design tools, truly capable robots, to your point, ones that don't fall over and miss each other when I mean, watching these robots do stuff today shows that they really don't know what's going on. If you want to play with this is actually open to the public. You can see it at marble.worldlabs.ai. So this is pretty cool. And, I think this is a really interesting statement about what the future really needs is not just better language interactivity, but a different kind of model that can actually understand the world.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think like it maybe this is a preview to something we're going to talk about later, but it begs the question of like, what do we want from our AIs? And if we really want like high functioning robots, they need to be a little bit better coordinated and spatially aware and all that type of stuff. Cause right now they're, more like toddlers than sophisticated athletic marvels. But do we need that? I guess it's like, I mean, that's maybe up for debate and like what are the areas where that's going to be helpful versus harmful to humanity and who puts guardrails about all of in place about all of that is unclear to me. So
You're right. Our last story will dive into this, but I think this real question of like so much of the AI world seems to assume that what we want to do is replicate human intelligence by mirroring in some way, shape, or form how humans learn. Like humans learn by doing things in the real world and seeing what happens. So AI needs, and like that is a real question. Like there's an assumption there that that's what we want is a human-like intelligence, and maybe it's not. Maybe there's a lot of stuff that can be good that's not human-like intelligence. So I don't know. We'll have to leave that one maybe for another day.
that's right. Well, speaking of intelligent humans, imagine running a brand campaign with the voice of some of your favorite iconic humans like Michael Caine or Maya Angelou and doing it legitimately. You don't even have to pirate their voices. That is now possible via 11 Labs' new iconic marketplace, which is I think a pretty cool name. So 11 Labs launched its iconic marketplace, which is a curated platform for companies to actually go in and license AI generated voices of iconic figures, living, deceased, or historical. And the key idea is that creators can browse a catalog of available legendary voices. So some of the ones that are in there right now, Maya Angelou, John Wayne, Alan Turing. And then they submit a project request. Then the rights holder for that voice, like the estate or the living person, if applicable, will review it and approve the sort of commercial usage rights if they like it. So for brands, this means a legally cleared voice asset rather than risking sort of unauthorized cloning. For rights holders, it's a performer first approach. You can monetize your voice IP, maintain control. And then 11 Labs is positioning this as solving one of the biggest ethical headaches, candidly, in voice synthesis, which is consent, traceability, and fair compensation. So it's live. You can go check it out if you want. There's 25 to 30 voices in there already, and it supports licensing across film, advertising, gaming, podcasts. Maybe we'll have Maya Angelou on here next week, education, and even more use cases. So it's pretty interesting to think about.
I had fun going over to this website and clicking through. They've got little samples of a couple of the voices, reading things that I think would be roughly something those people would say. And it's fascinating to hear these things in these. I mean, those are very recognizable voices. Some of them, like what those people sound like. And it was pretty cool. I am very curious how often these things really get used. Like how often are the rights holders saying, "Yeah, I'm okay putting those words into this person's voice and having those spoken." So I'll be curious how much it takes off. But it is fun. It is fascinating. It's interesting to see them targeting real human voices as opposed to just voices that they made up from scratch, of which there are many on 11 Labs that sound in certain ways. But this is like really mimicking real people, which was an interesting choice.
I have very conflicted feelings about this, I think, because on the one hand, it's super cool. But on the other hand, this like idea of putting words in somebody else's mouth and they didn't even get to consent to it, but they're whoever is going to benefit from the money from it, right? Their estate or their heirs just doesn't feel right to me with some of these like really amazing, incredible historical figures that maybe don't want their voice used on an advertisement for something that they wouldn't care about or that type of thing. So they're gone. So it's, victimless at some point, but it feels to me, I don't love that part. I wish it was more only living people who are getting to decide, yes, I want my name on that or not, versus the deceased and historical figures. But to each his own.
To each his own, but it will be interesting too because there's this content world which it creates, which is like to just feed on the ability for people even after they pass to become the voice of X or Y or Z or W. And I can imagine, you've got an iconic voice like a Darth Vader, and you want to have that voice in perpetuity be able to be used. But at the same time, I'm sure new actors are going, hey, like please let us break through and be the new thing. You don't need to let these people who had their run be the voice of things forever. So it's an interesting choice. I'm not sure I would have gone down this path either, just because it's also once you've got the capability, it's rife for potential abuse. And, 11 Labs had pretty good business just doing completely artificial voices. They're probably the best text to speech engine out there, but they went down an interesting path here. So we'll see. I'm curious how much it really gets used. Like, I don't think they're likely to get sued given the way the rights works, the approval by the rights holders, but how much approval is given is a different question, or whether this turns out to be a thing that ultimately they're like, it's not really worth it to have these words being artificially spoken by these people.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
All right, next up, is the model race ultimately going to be a race to the bottom? That's a question. I think we've talked about this question quite a bit, but one more time, here it comes. Baidu just dropped Ernie 45VL28B A30 A3B.
Wow, that's a name.
It's a name, very specific model type. It's a 28 billion parameter vision model built to compete with OpenAI and Anthropic on multimodal reasoning. But the headline, as has so often been the headline from some of these models coming from Chinese companies, it's smaller, cheaper to run, and according to Baidu, delivers performance on par with models 2 to 3 times the size and complexity, especially on complex reasoning and instruction following. So it's not so much to me that this model is groundbreaking. It's certainly not. But this new Ernie variant shows just how quickly cutting edge capabilities diffuse. This isn't a frontier trillion parameter breakthrough model. It's a mid-sized model that's engineered to surpass, in practical terms, larger Western models across benchmarks like multimodal reasoning, chain of thought robustness, tool use and planning. And it does it with just really aggressive cost efficiency, which is exactly what a lot of businesses looking to deploy AI really want at the end of the day. And so this really, I think, begs the question, is raw model performance a defensible strategy? Is it something you can recoup your investment on building and developing? Or do we need to think about these moats really shifting to distribution, ecosystems, vertical integration, proprietary data? Is that going to be what's ultimately defensible for these AI companies who've invested so much in developing the most cutting edge models that seem to be easily replicable?
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me like that is the only outcome, right? Because the development of the model itself or the concept is sort of like your aha moment, but any major innovation in history didn't actually become impactful until it was able to scale. And it's the productization and use cases that allows this thing to scale. It's not the aha moment of building the model itself. So I have to think over time that these companies are going to have to start focusing more on some of the stuff that we've seen from OpenAI, which is really focused on the user experience and the product of what they're putting out, and not just cheaper, faster, smarter models, whatever that continues to look like, because a lot of that juice has been squeezed and now you got to focus on some other stuff. At least that's my take.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's one of the reasons I'm very optimistic on either verticalized companies that are leveraging LLMs in concert with custom data integration, custom workflows, custom instruction, prompt engineering, context management, because those things are adding real value. And they're kind of like they can go replace the underlying model with a different model as they evolve. But I think the go to market motion to have trusted enterprise customers, the data integration layers, the orchestration layers, the understanding and integrating into workflows of real businesses. From a B2B point of view, I think those are really defensible in a way that an intelligent model isn't. And those models may become commodities. So ChatGPT clearly has a strategy with the user facing features and their just actual ownership almost of the concept of a chatbot in the B2C space. And then I think the companies in the B2B space that are playing in that kind of sitting between the raw LLM capability and the actual business outcome that a company wants, the people that are bridging that gap have a lot more defensibility in my mind for their business model over time than people making the best model. Sometimes they're the same. Google might be sitting in both parts of that stack, but if you're just in the bottom part, I think it's a really risky place to be. And I think if there's a reason to think that the bubble will pop, it will be that some of these companies are given valuations based on model performance, and that ultimately won't be enough to sustain a business, even if it's an amazing technical achievement.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, for our listeners, we're curious what you think about this and other questions we ask on the show. We're building this show with you. If you've got AI wins, failures, or real-world stories from your company, send them our way to email@whattheai.fm. Jeff and I want to feature more listener stories on the pod. Well, we promised to talk about what we are building AI for and whether superintelligence is a thing or not. So let's move to humanist superintelligence. Why is Microsoft aiming to create this? Microsoft has unveiled its vision for what it has now deemed, as I just said, humanist superintelligence. In a new announcement from Mustafa Soliman, head of Microsoft AI, The company laid out a plan to develop advanced AI systems designed to work for humanity rather than to replace it. Sounds like a good idea. This isn't about building a sort of general autonomous AI that can kind of run wild and achieve that sort of AGI that we've talked about so much. Microsoft says it's really focused on domain specific superintelligence, which it is just kind of think about as extremely capable systems in certain areas that are healthcare focused or science focused, personal productivity focused, but always done within human control. Suleiman explicitly rejected the idea of an AGI race, framing Microsoft's approach as a part of a broader, sort of deeply human project where humans are matter more than AI. That's sort of the mission here. And the company has outlined 3 near-term focus areas. Number 1 is AI companions, tools that help people learn, create, feel supported. Number 2 is medical superintelligence, where Microsoft claims its latest model hit around 85% accuracy on a New England Journal of Medicine case challenge, compared to just 20% for human doctors. So that's pretty incredible. And then third use case, scientific and energy breakthroughs, applying AI to problems like battery chemistry, power grids, and even fusion research. So this is an interesting sort of departure from all the other companies talking about AGI. Microsoft says humanity doesn't need that. Humanity needs to focus on humanity and how AI can help us be more human.
I like this. I like his framing. I think it's clearly a little bold, rejecting the AGI race, which so many of the foundational companies feel like they're in a race to a point at which the AI gets so smart and improves itself, and kind of like first one there wins everything, right? Like winner take all. Kind of rejecting that framing. I will say the first area of focus, AI companions that help people learn, create, and feel supported, feels a lot like what the other AGI companies are building when they talk about a race to AGI. I mean, it kind of feels like the chatbot that does your day-to-day work and serves as a support tool. So maybe a little bit making just a bold statement that is not so different from what everybody else is doing. But I continue to believe that the opportunities in medical and scientific research are just tremendously underappreciated generally, because I think it's much harder for the average person to understand what these models are doing. Like we talked about, there's another medical breakthrough model, and like I don't really understand how it's different than the last 10 we read about on the pod, but like I think there's a tremendous amount of progress there that's easy to ignore. So great to see them focused on that. And that first one is, I think, a little nod to like, it will also help white collar workers just do their jobs better and people live their lives better. But that feels a lot closer to the AGI, at least the way it's actually realized in the world today that everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also how it plays out. And one of the points that he makes that I think is really important is that a core sort of departure that he has versus others is we need to sort of align on what it looks like for humans to remain in control versus trying to build the best and most impressive tech. Because the best and most impressive tech could actually be an existential threat to humanity versus let's all align on what the sort of guardrails are of things that we agree on that this tech should not do. And then, you know, be good stewards of that as we sort of, race to whoever's going to build the coolest thing. Maybe the coolest tech in this situation is actually not the best for humanity. And so let's all agree that humanity should come first as we do all this. So I think that's an interesting framing. The whole emotional support component, I agree with you. It's a little bit confusing why that is maybe the best for humans, but there's some, I mean, I would like some support with my laundry and dishes. If it can do that, I'm happy. Like I would be happy to have a robot that can execute on that, whether or not they're super smart about physics or anything else. I just would love them to be able to do laundry and dishes. So we'll see what actually gets built if anything with this.
Certainly good debates, and I'm glad to see them happening in the US. I do always have to remind people too, though, that like in some ways, we don't get to control this. I mean, Microsoft can say, here's what we're not going to build, but there are other countries, China in particular, that has a very different set of values and expectations, racing towards some of these things. And it's interesting when you see what they're focused on. They're a little less focused on this concept of like a super intelligence, and a little more like, how do we get smarter robot? How do we get the practical day-to-day stuff? And you'd love to see, robotics, as Fei-Fei Li is talking about in her spatial reasoning, like that's a really big thing. And the robots aren't that smart now. And you don't need a super intelligence or a generalized intelligence to be able to have a robot that does your laundry and does the dishes and cleans up the house. That would be pretty awesome. And is a very different vision than, some sort of superhuman intelligence that's disembodied in a computer. And I'd love to see more of effort racing towards those kind of very practical applications of these technologies, and not just this kind of, concept of birthing a new being in a super intelligence that's, living in a data center. maybe in space, data center in space, maybe is where it lives.
Space. I think that's right. Yeah, one of the things that he says in his paper is we need to make sure that all of the stuff that we build is centered around, human principles. I'm like, well, who gets to define what those are, right? Because like you said, certain countries have very strongly held human principle beliefs that differ very sharply from other people's very strongly held human-centered beliefs. So that seems like a losing battle to try to come up with a world definition of what that even means and then apply it across all technologists.
Or even just a US definition. Seems like our definitions of priorities in this country are not consistent among different groups of people, at least if our elections and politics are to tell us anything. It would seem to be that we don't all agree on that. So it's nice to say that kind of stuff, but I do think the practical reality is like who gets to draw that line and how. And if you draw it for yourself, does it really end up being drawn for the industry because there are others who have different perspectives? It's a hard question for how you really make those things happen.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I think that's it for this week's episode of What the AI. But as always, we'll be back next week with the latest set of AI stories. Annie, I will see you next week.
See you next week.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message, and we do our best to cover them all on the show.